this is a very focused talk. It's just on the trial that we have designed and is awaiting scoring and potential funding from the NIH. So for those families who have boys, yes, thank you. So for those families, this is a focused um, talk on the trial design and plans for a phase 2 trial. It is not scored or funded at the NIH yet. We're awaiting that in the next month for a little more word on that. But I wanted to provide a little bit of anticipatory guidance on where this is at, what we've done, and how we've arrived at this here. So for families with boys who are under 11 or so years of age, this will be of greatest interest. So here we are. This was, so Josh Bunkowski was a major collaborator on this project. We also have almost everybody in this room would be involved in the running of the trial too. So they will have some information on this as well. I don't have any really relevant disclosures to this. The things we'll cover here, we'll do a little review of cerebral ALD. We'll talk about vitamin D's general risk and benefits. We'll talk about the phase 1 trial that we have already completed. We'll talk about why we need another study and then what we've done. So onward we go. So what do we know about cerebral ALD? Well, most kids, I wanted to emphasize this, most kids with ALD do not get cerebral ALD. That's important to know because I know it is a daunting thing for every family. MRI surveillance allows us to detect kids with cerebral ALD early before symptoms appear. That's the most important thing to know about the MRI surveillance is we're looking for lesions before symptoms appear. And when we catch them early, we can stop them effectively in almost all the boys we see and treat. We cannot yet predict who will get and who won't get cerebral ALD. Right now, ABCD1 mutations do not tell us who's going to get disease. I think that in the future we'll be able to qualify that statement a bit further, but that is where we stand at the moment. And we are getting better at understanding who is at risk. So risk is a probability distribution, meaning, we don't know for sure, but you're a little bit higher, a little bit lower risk, and these are some things we're learning here. The biggest and clearest one is just your age. So if you're between really the ages, let's say 2 and 12, that's the period where we're looking the most closely. And that's why we're doing MRIs every 6 months in that age range. And Dr. Malik and Mark Engeland's group and Florian's group have done some really nice work to map out some of the ages of risk, and there are some specific ages, and particularly between the ages of like 3 and 7, where the risk is a little bit higher. And this is actually not a Kemp et al. Paper. I meant to modify that, Stefan. My apologies. But it was done by Stefan's group, and they have, we used to say, well, fatty acids don't tell you who's going to get disease. We now can qualify that statement, and we can say, well, actually, the higher, of C26 and lyso-C26 levels, we can say you're a little bit higher risk for disease. And so that makes it a more attractive target for treatment and for trying to lower those levels. And then Josh Bunkowski and I have looked at vitamin D and latitude, and this is borrowed from the MS literature, multiple sclerosis, that is, looking at who's at risk for cerebral disease. So these are the things that we know to date about cerebral ALD. We don't yet have any strategies to prevent cerebral ALD. There are lots of people who are interested. I know every family who has a child identified in emergency screening, that is the number one thing you want to know is what can we do? And we're working on this. We don't have strong advice for you, at least not evidence-based advice. Okay, so what do we know? So I mentioned that we said, well, vitamin D is one of these things that might predict risk. So can we modify that? And that seems logical. So what do we know about vitamin D? Well, it's a steroid hormone. It's one of the most biologically ancient hormones in biology. It's involved in the development of bones, the immune function, and certain aspects of metabolism. Too little vitamin D can impair healthy function of these systems, but you can actually have very, very low vitamin D levels and do pretty well if you get past a certain age where you don't get bone problems. And so it's how important is it is maybe the question. We also know that too much vitamin D can be dangerous. So it is one of these vitamins. Some vitamins you can kind of take as much as you want, nothing happens. Vitamin D is not that vitamin. You can take too much and it can cause harms. And that's one thing that I want to make sure families know is sometimes we do see kids and other families come in, not just with ALD, but with other things, and they're taking way too much. And I have to say, let's pump the brakes on this, take it down a couple notches, and we'll recheck. What can happen if your vitamin D levels are too high is your calcium levels can go up. It can cause kidney stones. It can cause really bad aches and pains. It can cause actually some pretty significant psychiatric symptoms. And there are some other maybe less pronounced symptoms it can cause too. We'll get to that in a bit. Experts actually don't agree on a perfect vitamin D level. This is the other important thing. No, we really don't know what this right thing is for the average person or for anyone with ALD, in particular. But there's a pretty wide range that we think is probably safe and appropriate. And let's just say it's somewhere between 30 and 100 nanograms per milliliter. That's a blood level. Okay. So why might vitamin D be relevant to ALD? Well, we don't know for sure. What we can say is it does not appear to cerebral blood flow. So that's where we're working from here. And we don't yet know if vitamin D protects boys from cerebral ALD. We know that it might be associated with risk. That data is still, we don't have robust data. We have some data on that. We know that not all boys, we know this well, not all boys with low vitamin D levels develop cerebral ALD. That's very clear. So you can have low vitamin D levels and you do fine. And we know that some boys with high vitamin D levels can still get cerebral ALD. So this is where things get, these are probabilities. And so it becomes kind of a murky area for most of us to think, well, gosh, if it's not perfect one way or the other, why does it have to be so confusing? Well, this is a fairly standard paradigm in biology in that it's not black and white. Okay, so what did we do in our phase 1 trial? I know we've talked about this a lot in the past. I'm not going to rehash it here. I just want to, for people new and maybe just a quick refresher, from in 2016 to 2020, we ran a trial that looked at, that followed 21 boys and young men with ALD who did not have cerebral ALD, and we supplemented them with vitamin D tablets. We assigned everyone to vitamin D for 1 year. First half of the kids were enrolled and assigned basically the same dosing regimen. We found that actually bumped their levels up too high in some cases, so we modified to a weight-based regimen. And we measured vitamin D levels. We measured markers of oxidative stress. We measured cerebral blood flow. We looked at side effects. We've also done some additional studies we haven't yet published yet. I will have updates on those for you, and maybe next year. But we've done lots of other things as well. But I'll just say what we found here, where the vitamin D levels went up, markers of oxidative stress seemed to go down. Cerebral blood flow, at least this is a non-causal analysis, but cerebral blood flows seem to improve a little bit. And we did also notice some side effects. And so to the next point, well, why do we need another study? Well, most important thing here is we don't yet know if vitamin D supplements are actually helpful. So we don't know if they're really protecting. The study we did was very small. We can say that nobody during the study developed cerebral ALD. We did have one patient who developed cerebral ALD about 2 years after the study ended, and vitamin D levels seem to be in the right range. So we really don't, it is clear that vitamin D does not fix everything. And it was never the intent to imply that, but just to make it really explicit here. We also don't know yet if one vitamin D dose or range is better than another. And we need to know more about possible side effects associated with vitamin D. And here's our side effect table. Now, the side effects the things we found were not terribly daunting as side effects go, but they were there, and we found that maybe there was a difference in kids who were exposed to higher levels than not. So they were things like the print here is really small. I'm going to read some of them, but they were things like kids who were on really higher doses maybe had more upper respiratory infections. They might have had more. We had one child with a severe adverse event with an allergy attack, or sorry, an asthma attack. We had more headaches. We had more leg aches and pains. These kinds of things. So these are probably not that daunting to most people, but they're important, and I would take it as a signal. Like there might be more if we followed more kids for longer at high doses. We might see something more of this. This is important. Now, vitamin D. One of the things that's attractive about it is it's very cheap, it's very easy, and it's relatively safe. But this is the caveat here: is really understanding how safe is it, and is there a benefit? Because this is the question we're all weighing here. All right, I'm going to put this my child, or I'm going to, if you're a doctor, I'm going to put my this child who's been entrusted to me by their family on this supplement. Are we going to get anything out of it? Is our family going to be falsely reassured? Are they going to be at risk for these side effects? These are things you want to know about as you walk into these treatments. And so, as is typical in the drug development pathway, you go from vitamin D was discovered, quite a while ago, 100 plus years ago. It's been, we understand a little bit about its toxicity, but we're still learning more. We've completed our phase 1 trial, which is in this blue zone here. I can't see where my cursor is here, but you can see the blue zone. So that's our phase 1. We're moving then into this phase 2 area where we want to look at more on safety and dose finding, and we want to learn about efficacy. And that is the next phase of what we would like to look at in a large study. Now, it is a large study that we have to do to answer these questions, because to answer some of these questions, we need a lot of patience. And so I want to tell you about what we've designed and why we've designed it this way. And I want to say at the outset, I have 2 kids. One of my kids had a very serious disease early in life. It helped me understand, I think, a little bit better some of the risks and benefits and some of these really difficult decisions one has to make as a parent in terms of entrusting their child to a clinical trial or not. And so I did really try to think hard about this. Is this the kind of trial that I would want to put my son or daughter in? So this was very important to us as we designed this. And we started with a survey of families. I believe this was in 2022 we did it. We ran it over a few months. This was completely anonymous. I have no data on who filled this out. But we did ask people, and the survey was set up only to gather information for the design. And we asked, do you promise you are of ALD a parent? Do you promise you'll fill this out only once? And then would you... And our first question, would you consider enrolling your son in a study of vitamin D lasting for 3 years if all the boys were guaranteed to receive, moderate to high doses of vitamin D and not a placebo pill? And of course, most people think that's great. And that is actually what we set out to design first. What I want to tell you is the NIH reviewers thought that was totally unacceptable. We tried twice. They did not fund it. They would not give us money. They insisted effectively that we have a placebo arm. So this was of course our next question here is, would you consider enrolling your son in a study of vitamin D lasting 3 years if some boys in the study will be assigned to a placebo pill? Now, for 3 years on placebo, that's hard pill to swallow, right? I'm trying to protect my son from something really scary. Why would I do this for 3 years? I can get over the counter. And so this was something that really mattered to us too. And so lots of families said, no, I'm not so sure about that. And that makes sense. So some other families left some helpful comments. I just wanted families to know that we did hear from you. We did take your comments to heart. And what we did our best, and Josh and I and others spent a lot of time trying to design the very best trial. Now, I appreciate this is a complicated picture here, but I want to tell you what we did. So when it comes time, you can understand kind of what you might be walking into if your son might qualify for this. Now, so we set up this study to basically follow boys without any intervention for at least a year or so, and we want to recruit as many kids to this as possible. And we can just families are allowed to do to supplement their kids in any way. There's no specific limitations here other than just being safe and reasonable. So in this first kind of year one and year two here, we're trying to get as many families as we can, and we will follow them. We basically build in all the measures, and this is intended to work as just help us understand what happens just in general. If we're following kids really closely with all the same measures, how are the boys doing? What's happening? How many are using vitamin D? How many are not? Without us telling them what to do. And then at the beginning of kind of the second year of this study, it is a we then, and let me add some cues here. So this would start in fall 2025. We begin enrolling in spring 2026, and then fall. I know this sounds a long way away, but in fall 2027, we would then basically rapidly randomize many of the kids who are already enrolled to one of three arms. One is a period, not a long period, but a period where you can be taking whatever dose of vitamin D you want at this time. We are going to add something to that, right? So there are some restrictions that you can't have vitamin D levels that are too high at this entry level, but as long as you're not outside the range, we would just simply add something to that. It bumps, we sort of see if it, we follow how well it moves up your vitamin D level. We follow all these other markers of your brain perfusion. We follow your MRIs just as normal. We follow some blood levels of other markers. And we follow you for, if you're on placebo, you're for 1 year, and then you're switched to one of the two arms here, this medium dose or high dose. So everyone gets the drug within a year of starting in this current design. And then we follow all the boys over time. And this was the most fair and equitable way we could set this up. And we felt this was a study that, from my point of view, I would say, yes, I will enroll my son in a study designed like this. This is something that I would be willing to trust, my family to. And so this was really important to us that it met this measure. Study would then end, several years from now, and we would have our best answer yet. Did vitamin D do anything good? Did it do anything bad? And what can we draw from this? Do we need another trial? Do we need to say anything more? And so I want to take a little bit about how we picked our doses here. Okay, so so here I have this very vaguely stated medium dose. And it's dosed by weight. These are just probably some abstract numbers for the moment, but let me add some nuance to it. So we have a regular dose, or I say a placebo dose, a medium dose, and a high dose. And this was a study that's we're in the process of getting published here. This is a very large vitamin D sample of almost 500 kids. This is from our vitamin D study and two other vitamin D studies, where we just looked at what dose of vitamin D they were on and approximately where it put their vitamin D levels. And so kids who were taking nothing were generally at a blood level around 30, which is generally actually quite perfectly fine. Kids who were on this medium dose tended to have blood levels that were in the mid 40s, which is fine. And the kids who were on this higher dose had levels that were between 50 and 60, which is also quite fine. And so we set it up based in part on our first study to try and reflect some levels that we thought would be safe and appropriate here. So we want to learn about safety and maybe efficacy here in this trial. Like, does it work? Is it safe? But there are also other things we can learn too. So we can learn about vitamin D's effect on blood flow in the brain. That's a major goal of this one. We can learn about vitamin D's ability to improve antioxidant levels. We have some indication that might be the case, but there may also be a top end where the antioxidant levels might go down. That's the part we're kind of curious to look for. And do boys there are other things that are unrelated to vitamin D that we will learn from this. Do boys with variants of uncertain significance have lower risk of cerebral ALD or adrenal insufficiency? Do certain blood markers, and Troy's going to talk about this, I think, very soon, like neurofilament light, do they predict brain lesions as well as MRIs? Do we need to do MRIs on all the boys? Can we use something else to do this? Can we develop better MRI protocols? All these things will be achievable in this study, and this is one of the other reasons we're really excited about this study design. It allows us to gather a lot of information on things both related to vitamin D and things not that are very important to our community. Okay, so when would the trial start? I mentioned, and how would I enroll my son? Let me just, so here's really quick the inclusion criteria: an ALD gene. You need to be a boy. You need to be under age 11 at the time of enrollment, and this is just in order to put you in the right age range to follow the MRIs at the right frequency. And you need to have a brain MRI that's negative within the last 6 months or so for an ALD lesion. Exclusion criteria, the only one that I'll probably mention here is if your blood level is too high at the time of entry, we won't be able to include you if your vitamin D level is too high. So in that case, we won't be able to include you, but as long as it's below a certain level, you're fine to enter. And that level we have set here is actually quite high, so it should be an easy threshold for people to cross. That's a very high blood level that I don't see very many kids whose levels are that high, so it should be quite open to people. Okay, where would you enroll in? So fall 2025 is when we would start. I should say first, we will find out about funding maybe in the next couple of months. That's if the NIH still exists in the next couple of months. I mean that seriously. We'll see. But in the spring of 2026, we might begin enrolling if we're funded. This is an extremely competitive grant. Only about 1 in 20 grants are ever get funded here. It's a very, very difficult bar to pass. I want to emphasize that. It is a very, very difficult funding landscape here. But the sites are all the investigators in this room and a few others. So we have Stanford, Utah, Minnesota, Texas Children's Hospital of Atlanta, Children's National, KKI, CHOP, and MGH. All are sites you can enroll at. And so those are the sites you would go to enroll your child. And my best advice, actually, and I don't mean this simply as a plug for ALD Connect, but my best advice on staying updated is actually just to sign up for the ALD Connect mailing list, and that will help you sort of stay on top of all the trials, including this one. And with that, I will take questions. So, thanks. I see a question from Joan. Let me see if we can get a microphone to her.
Oh. How does the study account for any other treatments that boys with ALD might be getting?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the landscape is changing. So there are, there might be new treatments on the landscape by the time we begin. Right now, there aren't treatments that boys without ALD symptoms or without cerebral ALD symptoms might be getting. Boys with cerebral ALD might be eligible for some of the Minirex trials if they're, God willing, open at that time. But right now, that doesn't overlap with this trial. And so the only other thing that might be on would be steroids, which is fine. That's no problem. If they would only have a bone marrow transplant if they've already had a cerebral lesion. In which it's a good question actually. If you have a cerebral lesion or have had it, not that we wouldn't support you taking a reasonable dose of vitamin D, but it doesn't answer the question for this trial, so you wouldn't actually qualify. Yeah. Joan, you had a question? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
It might be kind of a loaded question, but does natural vitamin D that they receive on a daily basis, will that play into effect at all? So like a child from Miami versus a child from Seattle,
yeah,
their natural vitamin D levels are obviously going to be different. Will that also play into effect, or is that something that you're considering, or doesn't really think will make a difference in terms of this study?
Yeah, it's such a good question. It's one of the challenges in doing studies where you're studying something that the body already supplies and is part of just natural, physiology. It is one of the reasons that placebo controls in vitamin D studies are hard, just above and beyond the fact that it's over the counter, is that our bodies, we're getting vitamin D from the sun, we're getting vitamin D from our food, like milk products in particular, and so those things will vary naturally. So we do have to account for that, and we will do that through both statistical analysis, just looking at vitamin D levels, but it does matter still very much to the people who fund these studies. Is there somebody, can tell us who's not getting a new supplement before and after this? And so that is effectively what we're doing. It is the case at the onset of the study that I still plan to allow families to be taking vitamin D even at the time they enroll. They just can't change it in that first year. So whatever they're on, they can't move it. And so then we will either add something on top of it, or if it's a placebo for that first year, they'll just stay on the same dose. But it is one of the way we adjust for it is we basically use the level in their blood to adjust for it as best we can.
Myself, who are taking vitamin D because we want to help protect against our falls and things. You said there too much was bad, too little was bad. I'm guessing that maybe the dosages you were talking about for kids under 11. So can you help us understand what we older folks should be taking as dosages, perhaps according to our weight?
Yeah. My best advice actually is if you want to manage vitamin D levels in adults don't seem to play as much a role in health as they do in younger people. There are lots of caveats to that. My thought is that these things probably matter most early in life, and then the older we get, the lower and lower the impact as other things have accumulated and maybe those set points have already been reached. However, it's still not futile to try and keep your vitamin D level healthy as somebody, my age, your age. The best bet though is to actually, you can either take a very simple dose of like 1,000 international units a day as an adult, and that's generally very, very, very safe and sufficient for many people. But if you simply have your blood level checked with your doctor, the best predictor of how much you need is just how low or how high your blood level is at the time you're checking it, and they can help you with modify it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Questions? Oh, wait, sorry, one over there.
Have you looked at the vitamin D metabolizing enzymes, the CYP hydroxylases, if those are affected in these patients?
We haven't looked at whether ALD kids have different vitamin D enzymes engaged, or if there's any difference in kids with or without. We probably don't have enough kids to look at that in a way that would matter. You might need quite a few to do that. We have looked a little bit at some of the genetic and, at least RNA transcript engagement on a single cell level. And there's not a huge signal suggesting that by supplementing vitamin D, we're changing those gears. But we haven't looked at whether that affects the risk of a child or not in the way that you might with a large study. One of the things we do know from what are called Mendelian randomization studies, so studies that look at basically your genetic levels of vitamin D or things that predict those levels, is that people with lower vitamin D levels are at high risk for MS. And yet, after you develop MS, supplementing vitamin D doesn't seem to make a huge difference. It does seem to make a difference in developing MS, but it doesn't make as much a difference in treating MS. And so it is one of these slightly paradoxical paradigms, but there's maybe a switch that's involved there that is influenced by vitamin D, and once that switch is flipped, it's just less impactful. So we're still working in that prevention paradigm with that in mind, but yeah. Okay, I should. Oh, so, do we have time for another question? There's one more here, but I want to see. Yeah. Okay.
I was just curious, you were talking about the elevated levels of vitamin D causing adverse effects, and then I looked at the list of side effects. Some of those side effects from the high levels seem to be some of the symptoms that at least my son had prior to his passing from ALD. And so my question to you, and then the calcium levels, the higher calcium levels, calcium was always the thing that we referred back to when there's like spasms and that type of thing. I mean, even as a female carrier, I take supplements, magnesium or calcium to help with that. So I'm just wondering how that works.
Yeah, the symptoms I showed there it is a fairly generic list of symptoms. So what we call systemic symptoms of headache, malaise, aches, things like that. And I'm sorry, my sympathies for your son, by the way. But those symptoms are pretty common even just in growing, so it's hard to know if any of those were specifically due to vitamin D. If I were to guess, I'd say yes, probably some of them at the really high end, you are more likely maybe to get headaches or muscle aches or things like that. But I have to say, there haven't been very many studies in kids that put them on doses like this. So we don't have as much data on this as we would want. Some of those symptoms, actually, one of the tough things is trying to unravel what, the symptoms of high vitamin D are not the same as, but they can resemble symptoms of adrenal insufficiency. And so sorting out those two things is actually really important. We had to set up some specific kind of like algorithms for how we would sort out which is which. It's actually not that hard. Once you run a couple labs, you can figure out very quickly. But in screening them by phone or something, it's important to consider. The side effects were not overwhelming. We weren't daunted by them, but I thought, when I saw them, I thought, oh, this is worth noting. It's more than I was thinking we would get. So, thank you. The last thing I'll say is, for this study to work and for lots of studies to work, this will require an unprecedented level of engagement from enrollment from the family patients. So we really will need families, and I just want to make sure that if we are funded here, if we can get, I want to encourage people to really reach out and think about engaging in this study. It will succeed or fail based on how much community engagement we get. So, thank you.